All right, all right. Welcome everyone to another episode of Pathways to Informatics, where we interview various informatics professionals about their career journeys to give students an idea of all the pathways that are out there. I'm your host, Brian, and today's guest is none other than Dennison Lim, aka Mr. Dennis. I'm going to let Dennis do a brief introduction of himself, and then we can jump right into the questions afterwards. So, Dennis, you want to say a brief couple of words?
Sure. I'm actually a little worried about where this is going because you've known me too long. So,
Mhm.
my name is Dennison Lim. I've been in informatics for how long has it been now? Like 7 years or so. Previously at Mayo Clinic, and now I'm a product manager.
Okay. Well, a couple of housekeeping things before we ask some questions. And as Dennis mentioned, I do know him for quite some time now, so we have some interesting questions that we're going to ask him. But just for some housekeeping, this is a pre-recorded video, so we won't unfortunately be addressing your questions in real time, but definitely leave your comments and we can look at them after the live stream has occurred. So I like to start all these interviews with a icebreaker question, usually based on our personal relations. And my first question to you, Dennis, to just kick this off is, where has been your favorite place you photographed and why?
Um, I'm gonna have to say our time in Schwambacher's Landing because
Mhm.
I brought you there, I think 3 times in a row, trying to catch the sunrise on the peaks of the Tetons out there. And we finally got it on, I think, our last day in the Tetons, because all the other ones we took like 600 shots and all of it was overcast. So that's the one that comes to top of mind. But I mean, I've been to a lot of really cool places, and I'm very thankful for that, fortunately.
Okay. Yeah, that one was definitely very lucky. Of all times we catch it, it was the very last day. So it's definitely one of the ones that lingers in my mind too. Okay, well, I'm gonna jump right in, and this is a very deep question. So again, this interview is about your journey as an informaticist, and for all the times I've known you, I don't think I've ever really dived into this, and this has been something that I've always wondered. So I have a couple of list of questions here. I'm going to read this one. One of the things that stand out about your career journey is what appears to be an abrupt split from your clinical path during your PGY1 pharmacy residency at Indiana University Health, one of the top hospitals in the nation with direct training with Judith Jacoby, one of the most talented critical care pharmacists in our nation. And you decided to switch into informatics after that kind of experience. So from my personal recollection, you were also very interested in pediatrics at the time. So I've always wondered, and please tell me more here, what is your rationale in pursuing a PGY2 in pharmacy informatics instead of a clinical specialty?
Yeah, Dr. Judy Jacoby, the first,
Hmm.
I believe, PharmD president of
Yep.
Society of Critical Care Medicine,
Yep.
in my first rotation at Indiana University. I remember that being the time that I spent, I think, 80 hours a week for like the whole month I was there. You know, yeah, you're right. I came into my PGY1 at Indiana University fully committed to kind of the future in clinical practice. Even before that, I don't know if you remember, I did Shands block, which was a year at Shands,
Hmm.
and had a lot of focus on pediatrics. I remember like Lisa Thames's rotation, Gen Peds, Tara McCabe's rotation, PT Monk, Brian Kelly's rotation, and like pick you. I was like, all right, this is what I'm going to do. But I think once, in your intern year, you don't necessarily have the full scope of responsibilities, but when you're a resident, you do. And I started realizing that it was kind of repetitive to a degree that, yeah, there are a lot of things that I was doing that was really amazing and actually had impacts on patient care and outcome. But in the end of the day, what I was measured on was really a lot of the IV to PO conversions, the med recs, and that was kind of the repetitive aspect of every day that I didn't see myself having a long-term career in. And so fortunately, I picked Indiana University as well because of their informatics program. We had an informatics rotation right off the bat. They had a great informatics residency there as well. So a lot of resources and mentorship in that area. And after a while, I really saw that as an opportunity to, I think, increase the scale in which I can operate. So on the informatics side, as you know, you can make a change into the system and really impact practice as a whole across an organization and enterprise versus kind of day-to-day basis on a small team, person-to-person basis. So I found that as probably a better use of what I wanted to do in pharmacy, and so that's kind of how I ended up on the informatics path.
Okay. Very succinct. Just curious, was there ever an aha moment on maybe one of your rotations that you're like, yes, this is definitely something I need to explore?
I wouldn't call it an aha moment, not in my PGY1. I think in my PGY2, I definitely had those aha moments that confirmed, like, yeah, this is like the path I wanted to go, for sure. But my PGY1 at that time, I was still kind of flushing out whether I wanted to stay in pediatrics.
Mm,
I also had a crazy amount of pediatric rotations in my PGY1, I think like 3 or 4, and then I only had one informatics one at that point. But it ended up working out.
And remind me, did you end up applying to any non-informatics PGY2s?
No, it was just all PGY2
Okay.
informatics.
So you knew at the end of your PGY1 that you were definitely going to informatics.
Yeah, my program director Tate, he was like, "You got to figure this out before mid-year," and so you
Okay.
can't go into mid-year with like waffling around about like what you're gonna do because you just don't have that kind of time. And so I figured it out before mid-year that that's the path I was gonna go.
Okay. And it all worked out. All right. Well, thanks for sharing that. Next question. This one is also another one that I've always wondered. So we competed for many of the same residency positions and then also subsequent job postings back in 2013, 2015. And then personally, I found it a challenge to find resources that taught me about pharmacy informatics. Obviously existed, but wasn't that easy for me to find. So I wanted to get your thoughts on how you prepared yourself to be a competitive applicant for two parts. One is to for the residency, and then the second part would be, for jobs afterwards.
Yeah, good question. Residency, I was very fortunate to obviously have a great program director in Tate Chulo. And he allowed me to kind of customize my residency project in a way that really lended towards leveraging some informatics skills that I can then pivot in terms of how I discussed, my involvement and interest in informatics. It was a electronic health record kind of data collection and pre-post kind of study for our post-discharge patients
Mm,
for cardiac MI related medications. And so that allowed me to explore our electronic health record there, to explore the data that's within it. And that really let me speak to, what you would potentially be doing in a PGY2 informatics and in an informatics career. Um, it was very different in terms of when we got out of residency at the same time and were looking for jobs because at that point, residency at Ohio State University, the Ohio State University, gave me just such a range of experiences that I could really speak to almost all aspects of potential opportunities out there, from whether it was clinical related, decision support or order sets, whether it was operational related when I stood up a whole new pharmacy in my residency, or whether it was implementation related when I brought up our cancer hospital on our new electronic health record. So the the 0 to 60 in a PGY2 informatics residency is definitely remarkable in how much you can learn within that short year. And really, by the time we were applying, it was like 6 or 7 months in, not even a full year. And so very much better prepared for those opportunities after residency. I'm not sure if that was the same for you and kind of how you felt about your experiences, but for me, there wasn't really a position I applied to where I didn't feel like I could be competent in my job.
Yeah, I think it's certainly an amazing opportunity that we had in our PGY2s. It was just hit the ground running. You own the projects from end to end. And I felt pretty comfortable going into PGY2 job applications as well. But maybe let's flip the perspective on that question just a little bit more, because I think part of it, my intent was to also share what resources you may have used outside of residency, because, there's not that many PGY2s out there. And sometimes people getting into residency or getting into these positions might not have the opportunity to pursue residency. So how might they learn more about informatics? Did you use any external resources at all to learn more about it?
I use my network.
Mm,
And I think you can attest to this. Like our particular year, the 2013 to 2014 year of like informatics residents was really close, and I think we kind of knew almost all of them. That was a different time when there weren't like I don't even know how many residencies there are out there for informatics now, but like I think at that time it was like 10 or 11. So it wasn't too hard. Um, I use that network a lot in terms of bouncing ideas off of each other. What are you doing there? What's working? What's not?
mm,
And then how we can translate that to something local. And then, in addition to that, how they were approaching, career pathways, pursuing new jobs, or learning new skills. Um, that was kind of my resource. At that time, there weren't a ton of informatics resources as there are now, between ASHP and PHIA that's out there. There's definitely a lot more resources now for
mm.
people who may not, find residency is the right path for them. Residency is definitely a very specific, intentional thing to do that has its ups and downs, and so if you can get in, with someone, find those resources today and leverage those, I think that might be one way to go to get into informatics. ASHP has an entire section dedicated to informatics.
Mm.
A lot of people working in those work groups. I was in charge of one of a few of those for a number of years, and I think they produce great content. And that's probably the starting point. But there's also other organizations such as the Pharmacy Informatics Academy and a lot of people on LinkedIn who are interested in spreading the opportunities within informatics.
Okay. Yeah, just talking to different people in the network now, many of them didn't pursue residency, but are practicing in pharmacy informatics right now. And many people ask the question of how do I learn more, even though they're already in the role. So definitely leveraging all those resources that you talked about earlier can certainly help. Next question. Many of these are focused on your residency because it's always very interesting. Next question here is, one of the things that I admire most about your journey is your decision to pursue a PGY2 at a site that hasn't yet established a PGY2 pharmacy informatics residency yet, which basically made you the inaugural resident. So, as new residencies are continually increasing nowadays to meet the demand of students, I'm sure this is a question that crosses their mind too. Should I pursue a brand new residency? So I want to know from you, can you share your thoughts on how you evaluated PGY2s? And then in particular, why did you decide to take a risk on a brand new residency site?
Good question. And I think I'm not necessarily risk adverse, so
Mm,
something being brand new and unproven is not something that scares me. So once you take that out of the equation, it's almost like evaluating any program. It's really the people and the opportunities.
mm,
For me, the Ohio State University was my top choice because, one, I had a really great connection with Beth Pryor. I think she, at the time, I met her, one of my major mentors in my career, in life in general. And so I knew that would be kind of a great fit for me in terms of my own personal and professional growth. But on top of that, it's the opportunity, right? The opportunity at Ohio State was to really mold the program in a way where I envisioned it. And so I had a lot of input in terms of, how it should function, what are the norms in the culture. And so that was enticing to me. I like creating new things. And that was an opportunity for me to kind of set that standard. And I think since then they've produced some fantastic residents. Um, but also it's the people. I remember, when you get burnt out in residency and you need a little bit of time off. I was playing Minecraft with my, preceptors, JJ and David and Danica. So I think all of those components are important. Not to say that any other program I interview that didn't have those, but I think the opportunity to create something new was what really pushed me towards that direction.
okay. I kind of guessed that as well, but certainly you made the most of that experience and set the foundation for future residents there. Okay, this was a little bit of a long lead up question. Two follow ups on this lead up here. So, after you started your clinical informatics position in 2015, It was actually quite impressive to see how fast you developed into a leader, specifically in the pharmacy automation space. So you not only took the lead role, and I still remember that meeting when you got assigned this for our Pixis implementation, you also parlayed your abilities to lead external to the organization as well. There's like a history of this. So you started out presenting emerging technologies in pharmacy automation in 2016 in MSHP. Then you took a lead role on the IB Workflow and Robotic Technologies Workgroup on ASHP SOPIT in 2017. And then you did subsequent back-to-back years as vice chair and then chair positions in 2018 and then 2019 in the operations section advisory group for ASHP SOPIT. So you did a lot there. And I want to know a couple of two things. The first thing is I would have thought you'd naturally gravitate towards more clinical decision support roles, given your extensive clinical background and training. So what made you double down on automation technologies?
I think everyone wants to go into a job and think like they know exactly what they're going to do. And when it doesn't turn out that way, they get disappointed and that job kind of burns them out. But for me, I approach the situation that, I will do kind of what's the need and what is available, and then grow into that area. And so at the time, obviously, it was someone needs to take on our automation implementation and roadmap and timelines. And I was assigned, and I didn't know anything about it. But I saw it as an opportunity to learn and dive deep into what that field entailed. Um, it turned out really nice for me because, frankly, there's not a lot of people that get deep into automation down to the HL7 layer, down to working with engineers over vendor partners. And so it allowed me to kind of grow my niche, and I saw that as an opportunity to continue to do that. And so my approach has always been to not necessarily like, this is what I envision that I'll be doing for the rest of my life, or this is what I envision, that is going to be my responsibility. It's take advantage of the doors that open, and then grow into those areas where you have enjoyment. And certainly the challenges and the intricacies and the quirks of automation and interoperability and interfacing was definitely one of those areas that I felt like I had a lot to offer, but also a lot to learn.
I like that. And probably where we differ a little bit there, I think I'm more inclined to chase things that I truly enjoy and passionate about and probably know. And it seems like you just take on whatever is needed. But then it's great because you make an opportunity out of it. Okay. So along those lines, because as you mentioned, it was an area that was newer to you. You just took it on because it was an opportunity. I want to know, as a follow-up to that, what were some of the most helpful resources, colleagues, or mentors that really helped you develop in this area?
Yeah. Again, it all goes down to the network. And I think I don't know that I can understate how important network is. Even in niche areas within our industry, there's other people working and tackling similar problems. So ASHP was probably my number one resource at the time, especially because I was on the automation and operations section advisory group. I was able to make those connections and start asking people, like, how did you approach this, and what could you have done better? And then as I started encountering those scenarios, I kind of had some foresight about what to expect and how to plan for it. Certainly we were one of the later organizations that upgraded our electronic health record. And so there's a lot of learned experiences from my colleagues. But I think as ASHP continued to grow, they started producing more resources, guidelines, and statements that really helped me make decisions around how we implement our automation. And so that was really helpful. Beyond that, it was a lot of just trial and error in terms of digging deep into HL7 and just seeing what works and what didn't. I kind of enjoy the troubleshooting aspect of it. I always have, and I think I always will, in terms of getting down to the source of the problems. And that's what I really enjoyed. But that's also something that I think more people can spend time doing rather than looking for documentation, potentially trying to find their own solutions through, I would call it brute force. That's really what it was. It's just like seeing what works and what doesn't.
Okay. Yeah, and that sounds very characteristic of like, people who have a bias for action. You just do it and then you learn from it, which is very, very good trait to have. Okay. I definitely echo the resources and network that ASHP has, as I've formed a lot of those during my time on SOAPIT. Next question. So moving a little bit different now. One of the most impressive things that you did during our go live implementation, specifically the very first one, was like work for it was like 30 hours the day straight. I don't remember how long it was, 20 or 30 hours. I think it was 30 hours.
It was over
Um,
30. I don't remember.
oh, over 30 hours. Okay, we'll just use that.
It's
Over
says get
30 hours.
lost.
But why that was impressive is because I recall that you single-handedly helped triage, reconcile, and then lead the team through that very first night or day, whatever you want to say, when we went live. Now, without going too much into the specifics, I just want to know, can you describe some of the big picture strategies and techniques you use to successfully lead us through that night? Like, what was going through your mind?
Yeah, that was an interesting time. So context for that was basically we went live and there was an issue, and I've already been at the command center for like 12 hours, and then I had to stay like an additional like 12 plus, hours. And by that time I was awake 30 plus hours straight to resolve the issue. I think what went through my mind really was at the time that was our first implementation, but I also knew kind of the end to end entire technical workflow for what the problem was. And so I knew I also was one of the only people that could actually be there to help resolve it if the resolution came in time. So it was a partnership between ourselves and our vendor partners, engineers on their side to help resolve that issue. I think my primarily strategy was understanding one, what can I do to make sure clinicians have access to their medications as informatics pharmacists. That was the most important part, and then beyond that, how do I communicate kind of what are ETAs, what are what is potential problem, identify problem, potential fixes. How do I communicate that to our end users, our stakeholders, our leadership above us? So I was trying to juggle multiple things in my head in terms of how do I fix the problem, how do I communicate the problem, how do I understand the time to resolution, and all of that came through my previous experience prior to that, in my implementation time at Ohio State. So
Mhm.
residency prepared me a lot for just crazy things that would happen. And I felt like I worked very comfortable in that situation. I was very tired, but I had a lot of coffee as
Mm.
well. Um, but I think that's kind of my strategy in terms of I was a shepherd for the technical pieces, but I also needed to be the person that communicated the problem, and also offer a mitigation for our end users to make sure they still had access to what they needed to do for patient care. Um, I'm not sure if that answered fully the question, but
Yeah.
that's yeah.
I
Hopefully
think
that helped.
so, and I think that's appreciative because one of the most important things about being in a clinical informatics position is you prioritize patient care, and I think that's
Yeah.
good that you thought about that as the very first thing. How do clinicians access meds? Very first part. So, yeah, I think that's great. Always good to break down big problems and figure out how you thought through them.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think in informatics we tend to get lost in the weeds sometimes. Like we're all about the data and like
Yeah.
the analytics, and in the end of the day, man, like we're responsible for getting a medication from point A to point B. That's
Hmm.
like the number one thing. If you can't do that, literally nothing else that you do matters. And so that's kind of what was top of mind for me.
Okay. Fair enough. We're going to do a little bit of a tangent here towards something different, more professional development. So, in 2020, you started your MBA. However, given your track record, I'm sure most, if not everyone in the community, would already consider you a leader within the pharmacy profession, given all the things that you've accomplished. Now, can you tell me more about your rationale on why you decided to pursue an MBA?
Yeah, I think at the time I was thinking, what are my opportunities to get into a leadership position, and if I were to get into that position, um, what would be my skill deficiencies in those areas? So I top of mind for me going into the MBA was that I had basically no understanding of financials of an organization.
Hmm.
And so that helped me. We did a lot of financial analysis in accounting in MBA. Also more formalized structure for leading and managing people and teams. And so that was a big aspect of my MBA. But beyond that, I think what I didn't anticipate and that I realize now after I finished it was really the way that the MBA prepares you to think about problems in new ways. And I think part of that is around the many frameworks that you get taught. When you think about the Pesto, the Porter's Five, the 5 Cs, the 4 Ps, all of that stuff is something that was at the time new to me and gave me new tools and a new perspective on probably old ideas and old problems. I think that's probably the most valuable part of it. To be honest, I think the accounting and finance stuff, that's fine. I don't know that I will use that. It's good to have understanding, but what I use probably more every day than before is really how to think in frameworks and how to kind of do kind of the MECE approach to everything, the mutually exclusive, collective, exhaustive approach to problems. And that's through my MBA. That was something new that I didn't anticipate and that I learned that I use every day.
Yeah, I talked to a couple folks in master's programs, and they all seem to say the same thing. Personally, from my experience in the MPH, it was also the frameworks that we use. We have specific frameworks we use to solve problems in public health, and then specific frameworks to analyze a public policy. So you kind of answered the question that I had afterwards, which is, what are one or two things you found most helpful in your MBA studies? And it's the frameworks. Okay, very very helpful to know. Now, here's another one that's related to your MBA. If someone was interested in following a similar career path as you, what would you say to them if they asked about your thoughts on pursuing an MBA?
Yeah. I think the number one thing that I would have them keep in mind is, do they have a plan or a vision for what they want to do after their degree? And if the answer is no, it's probably not the right time to pursue it. Just because it is a lot of, certainly money, but also time. I lost every weekend and every weeknight for 2 straight years. Now, fortunately, it was during the pandemic, which honestly probably the best possible time to do a executive MBA because there's like no FOMO. There's nothing going on. Everyone's locked down. We're not in that position anymore, so you're actually giving up stuff at this point. And so, are you willing to give up all of that without a plan for what to do afterwards? Part of why I say that is because it's not just that you have the letters after your name; it's also what experiences that are you using in your day-to-day work and life that you're now combining with your learnings from your MBA to really make it's something that will highlight you as a better candidate. If you're just pursuing the letters, and not additional experiences on top of that, then it's not going to be a valuable degree for you. And so that's why I say you need to kind of have at least a sense of what you want to do afterwards before you pursue it, beyond the expense and beyond the time aspects of it.
Yeah, I certainly echo that. It's beyond the things that I've learned in my MPH and even the network and stuff. There are many intangibles that I've gained value from my MPH. But okay, here's a fun question, and this was something that I saw a lot of when I was doing some research here. So Clubhouse came out, I think, in 2021. You, along with many others, seemed very intrigued and invested in it. And as I prepared for this interview, most of the content I saw out there was of you in Clubhouse rooms, articles, blogs, and then I saw you even mentioned in podcasts. I guess all that content was archived. So from a career and professional standpoint, what were some of the things you liked most about Clubhouse?
Yeah, Clubhouse was a very precious time, and it burned bright very quickly, and then it kind of like smoldered very quickly as well. I think it was a product of like the lockdowns that were happening. I remember it was like, I think I started doing it like this time last year in January.
Hmm.
Was height of our lockdown, and I think the early days of Clubhouse was really, for me, a opportunity to learn about a host of stuff that otherwise I wouldn't have exposure to. It's this whole idea of the confluence of a bunch of venture capitalists, a bunch of, engineers and product people and marketers in this digital health space that I had very little exposure to prior to that. And I would say in probably like the 2 months where I went like hardcore into Clubhouse, I learned probably more in that 2 months than I would have learned 2 years outside of that, because it was
Hmm.
a condensed think tank of really bright people that had really interesting ideas at the time, and we had just fascinating rooms. And the connections I made out of that are some of the best that I still treasure and value today. Um, but it was also incredibly stressful because it was such an active platform that you needed to have like your full attention. It wasn't like something you put in the background, and if you wanted to participate and not look like a fool, you really had to listen the whole time, like
Hmm.
actively listen. So I remember doing like 8+ hours after work every night, and then like just wake up exhausted, and then like go back to Clubhouse after work the next day and do like another 8 hours. It was great. I definitely a lot of learning from it though, and I think that's probably the connections and the new thoughts and perspectives and ideas I got from Clubhouse during those 2 to 3 months was really what I valued most out of it.
Hmm. So follow up to that then is, have you found an alternative? Because I don't see Clubhouse very active anymore nowadays.
Yeah, it's kind of dead. The founders killed it. Not just the founders, but also the pandemic restrictions lifting kind of
Sure.
killed it. But no, I do miss it. I don't know that I would do it again, knowing kind of like
Mm.
the amount of investment and time that it
Hmm.
requires to actually make the most out of it.
Mhm.
It was, like I said, like kind of a precious time that will probably not happen again just because it was like a weird confluence of events.
Mhm.
But no, there's not really an alternative, and I wish there was. I think there's definitely a marketplace for ideas and the way that it was exchanged.
Yeah.
I wish it was less active because like I said, it's super stressful to have to like listen and hang on to every person's word so you don't sound like an idiot when you say something. Um, yeah, no, I wish there wasn't. Maybe all of this LinkedIn stuff you're doing is kind of where that marketplace lives, and something more asynchronous would be better.
Yeah, we'll have to see. I mean, LinkedIn's piling audio events now, so I mean, it seems like a lot of different groups are too, because it honestly was amazing. I actually listened to a couple of archived Clubhouse rooms and podcasts that you were on, and it was nice to see the connections that were formed because it was obvious there was a lot of good things happening on Clubhouse. So, okay. Let's switch over to something different once again. You recently transitioned into a product role, which is both a shift from pharmacy, but also very similar to the clinical informatics role you previously held. Two questions on this. The first one is, how similar are the two roles in terms of skill set? And I'll ask you the second one afterwards.
Yeah, and just up front, I'm not authorized to speak on anything related to my current job or company, but I can speak in generalities about kind
Mhm.
of product and informatics. I think they're quite translatable, in the sense that people come into informatics with all sorts of backgrounds, and there's a diversity of opportunities in informatics that isn't just purely technical, isn't just purely clinical. And I think in product, it's very much the same way that people come in with all sorts of backgrounds and they
Hmm.
have all sorts of diverse responsibilities. Um, in terms of the translatable aspects of it, I think primarily it's going to be, in informatics, you always have to prioritize what's kind of most important. That's very much a product experience as well. We have stakeholders in both types of positions, tons of stakeholders in informatics, and just as much as in products. And then kind of the major difference for me, and I'm still wrapping my head around this as I'm kind of like a month and like 2 weeks in,
Mhm.
is really in informatics, and you can attest to this. We are on the side of we're the users of a vended product. And so when there's a feature that's not capable, we just say, oh, it's not possible, software limitation. And then if we're nice, we'll write a change request to the company, and the company will prioritize it on their side. And maybe a year later, um, it comes in like a version 0.1 alpha that's like half baked and may or may not work the way you want it to work. Um, Products are very different because you're surrounded by designers and engineers, and I think the question there then isn't that, oh, it's not possible. It's, is it valuable and is it worth our doing, which is a totally different calculus. You don't have the ability to escape hatch of saying, oh, it's a limitation, can't be done. Theoretically, anything can be done. Is it worth the effort? Is it valuable to the business? Is it valuable to the user? And I think that's kind of the new aspect and layer on top of kind of our traditional responsibilities in the informatics world.
Yeah, there must be a different mind shift to think about it like that. Because yes, you're exactly right. When it's not possible, we just tell them it's not possible, and then we write up request. Okay, so on that note, with you know product managers, in talking to some individuals in my network, I do hear a lot of interest in folks that are potentially interested in transitioning to product. So I'm kind of curious, since you made the transition, what are some of your maybe top one or two recommendations that you have for someone who may be in a clinical informatics position looking to transition into product?
Yeah. I actually talked about this with like David Berkowitz and others that you and I know in common that are pharmacists in product. I think what probably needs to be stated up front is that it's not so much of a career path or even a transition. It's somewhat of a pivot, because how you operate is similar in a lot of ways, but how you present yourself and your experiences and your accomplishments is a little different than the traditional academic aspects of pharmacy informatics. Most informatics people work in academic centers or at least large hospital systems and chains. And so that's a very different world in terms of how you're evaluated, how you present yourself, how you approach problems and situations than you would in a product role. And so I would think the key aspects for transition is really looking at, do you have a philosophy around, prioritization and problem solving and stakeholder management? And can you articulate that well in the context of what you could potentially be responsible for in a product role? And that could be a feature, that can be an entire product. Is it consumer facing? Is it, internal facing? Is it completely greenfield where there's nothing out there like it, and then you have to kind of like invent from scratch? How do you contextualize your experiences in a way that in informatics where there's not a lot of greenfield, like things are, you have a vendor that has a spec, you have an electronic health record that has a well documented system of what's possible and not possible. And so it's a much more ambiguous position in terms of what you can and cannot do, versus in informatics it's much more rigid in terms of
Mm.
what you can and cannot do. And so thinking about how you can translate the times where you worked in ambiguity in informatics is going to be important, and how you manage that and your philosophies around ambiguity, because I think that's probably the major difference between the two.
Yeah, I like the rephrasing there. It's not a transition; it's more of a pivot. I talked to some of our mutual connections, and it seems as though they echo the same sentiments. It's almost like you have to rebrand yourself. You're not a informaticist anymore. You are a product manager, and then yeah, a little different flavor there. Okay, well, that's most of the specific questions that I have for you, but we have a couple of overarching questions pertaining to your entire career history. So, as I wrap this interview up, just want to ask you some of these questions, and I have three in particular. The first one being, what has been the most impactful thing or things that has made you successful in your informatics career?
Always be learning.
Hmm.
Even if you're doing kind of the day in, day out, keeping the lights on aspects of informatics, which frankly, there are a lot.
Hmm.
There are a lot of keeping the lights on, and it gets mundane. There's always opportunities to learn. And whether that learning comes from getting deeper into what you're doing, so getting more knowledge deep inside of HL7, for example, or getting broader. So beyond kind of what you're doing and looking broad. I think both of those are key aspects of continual learning. I think you both have to have a deeper understanding of, the processes that you're either participating or you're crafting in, and making sure that, are there better ways to do it? If not, how can I make it better? Forming philosophies around that. And then more broadly, how do you branch out and leverage the experiences that you have in other areas that you may not have experiences prior? Informatics, as with I think any career, you should always find an opportunity to learn, and how you can begin to leverage your skills in areas that you're currently not, responsible for or have any, responsibility for.
Yeah, I like that. As they say, the only constant in life is change. And so if you're not learning, you're going to get left behind. So definitely really good feedback there. Another question. If you were to go back in time, what would you have wished you had known when you started off in your career? It could be any point in your career, just pick a time, but what's something you would wish you had known before?
It's such a common question, but I always struggle to answer it just because, you know, I look at where I am today and I'm really appreciative of it. And so like if I would say I would known something and change, the path, I think it might be a little different. I think probably what I wish I have known early on I think in pharmacy school is really understanding the power of network. I don't think I
Mm,
really understood that until probably my PGY2 informatics residency, where I really began networking with the community in informatics and more broadly within pharmacy and to an extent outside of it. Um, I wish I was kind of like our mutual connection, kind of like the Ryan Hamschilds of the world, where
hmm.
they realized the power of network
Mhm.
very early. And I would say, any of your listeners or watchers, I think that is, the aspect that is understated in formal education in schooling, because they think like, oh, you got to get your A's, you got to get your projects and your achievements and your certificates. The power network was undersold to me until very later in my life, and I wish probably that would have been earlier.
Yeah, I think I was fortunate. Ryan and his dad rubbed off on me quite a bit, but also probably because I didn't match, and then I realized, oh, network makes a big difference. It's not what you know. Okay, well, here's another common question that's usually asked to folks in interviews. What has been the most challenging time in your career and why?
Oh man, that's a good one. I think the challenging times are, I recently obviously made this job transition,
Hmm.
and I think the challenge here was, am I going to leave something behind where it's going to be totally brand new for me and I'm not going to be competent at what I do and I'm just going to suck at it. Um that's the challenge for me, is like I don't like being in a position where, as I spent like 7 years in informatics, I felt like I was pretty competent in being able to do almost anything in it to some level of confidence and competency. But when you go into kind of a new area, you really don't know what you don't know, and so I think it's both really exciting. I do love the challenge, and I do love the unknown, but it's also kind of the probably the challenging time for me because now I'm not using my pharmacy degree and to an extent my knowledge. I'm using all of the stuff I learned in my informatics experiences. It's the project
Hmm.
management, it's the people management, the stakeholder management, prioritization, timelines, and strategy and scoping and all of that stuff, which is nothing they ever teach you in pharmacy school. Nothing they frankly even teach you in PGY1 and to a lot of extent PGY2 residencies either. So it's all the on-the-job learnings that we've had outside of formal education, which is really fascinating, but also a little bit stressful at the same time.
What's interesting about that is that you mentioned that as your most challenging thing, but yet it's very characteristic of who you are based on this whole interview. You're pursuing things that are new, a little bit more risky, if anything, and are a bit of a challenge. So it seems characteristic of you, anyways, to do these kind of moves, even though this is
Well,
a pretty big leap of faith.
well, you mean if you don't ever feel challenged, you're not ever really growing, right? And
Fair.
I think one of the reasons why I ended up, pursuing this path was, the keeping the lights on aspect of informatics. Just like the repetitive nature of my PGO1 clinical aspects of it was, not challenging.
Mm,
And I always like to feel that level of challenge just because it pushes me forward, it pushes me ahead, and makes me learn more and be better. And I think if you want to have a long term, career that's diverse and full of like cool accomplishments and stuff like that, you really do have to push yourself.
mhm. Yeah, this made me think that I have another colleague. I won't mention his name though. He actually transitioned out of a pharmacy informatics position because of the same reasons you did. Just the idea of keeping the lights on. He did it for a couple of years and actually pivoted completely to a non-healthcare field in software engineering, which interesting. He was looking for that challenge too.
Yeah, I met that colleague. Good guy.
Yeah. Okay, so one final question, and this is to primarily for the listeners, is what advice would you give to someone that has an interest in informatics?
These days, I think there are more resources than ever in the informatics area. Um, and this is a time now that I think we'll need more people in informatics now than ever. Um, we didn't talk a lot about this in terms of what the landscape of informatics looks like, but my personal opinion is that there's going to be a greater need for it as we begin this kind of concept around consumerization of health. You think about all the new technologies and the wearables out there. Um, for whatever market leader that eventually takes them, to a broad utilization, they're going to need informatics people to organize the data, present the data, and make that data interchangeable. And so that's all kind of in the wheelhouse of informatics. So I think at this point, taking whatever you can out there that's either a free or a paid resource in informatics, learning how those concepts can apply to not just the traditional aspects of inpatient informatics, but also the consumer side of informatics. Um, I think that's an opportunity that once you understand how those pieces connect, you can present yourself in a way that really puts you at a top of a candidate pool for some of these positions that will be coming up around consumer health and startup life, and not even startup life, but big tech going into healthcare. We'll need informaticists. Just as when all these electronic health records were being converted in these large academic centers and large hospital chains, needed informatics people. Yeah. We're at the forefront at the digital transformation of healthcare, and there's nothing more digital than people who manage the healthcare data. And so this is a good time to get into informatics.
It's very interesting because there's like a divergence of opinions on that matter. What would be great, because I see you have a Medium blog there with only one post, is that you should probably write about that. I'm sure there'd be a lot of value that you can provide to the viewers who are looking to getting into informatics at this time. Okay, well, that's kind of it for the interview. Went a little longer than expected, but that's great. A lot of valuable insights from Mr. Dennis here. Just want to thank Dennis for coming on today. Thank everyone that's tuning in, and then we'll see you all in the next episode. Okay, bye, everyone.